Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're plunging into an idea that, honestly, promises to transform how you approach pretty much everything, from your daily to-do list right up to your biggest life goals. We're talking about something known as the 80-20 principle. Our deep dive today is squarely based on Richard Koch's groundbreaking book, The 80-20 Principle, The Secret of Achieving More with Less. Now, you might also know it as the Pareto Principle. It's a powerful, almost deceptively simple concept that, once you kind of grasp it, reveals surprising truths hidden right there in plain sight.
Absolutely. And our mission, really, in this deep dive is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge from this material. We'll explore not just what the 80-20 principle is, but also how it has profoundly shaped the world as we know it, and, crucially, how you can apply it in your own life to achieve much more, often with significantly less effort. The promise here is nothing less than boosting your personal effectiveness and, yeah, your happiness, too.
So, okay, for listeners hearing about the 80-20 principle maybe for the first time, what's the fundamental concept, the thing that truly unlocks its power? How would you define it simply?
Right. At its heart, the 80-20 principle basically says that a minority of causes, inputs, or effort, often it's around 20%, typically lead to a majority of the results, outputs, or rewards. That majority often falls around, 80%. It's about this inbuilt, almost predictable imbalance between cause and effect.
So like the example from the book.
Exactly. Think of it quite literally. 80% of what you achieve in your job might actually come from just 20% of the time you spend working.
That's such a powerful idea because it's so, well, counterintuitive, isn't it? We're kind of conditioned to believe in this linear world where more effort always equals more results, where everything's balanced.
Right.
But the 80-20 principle completely flips that on its head. The core insight here seems to be that a huge amount of effort, maybe, 4/5 of it, might actually be largely irrelevant to the final outcome. So if we can identify that vital 20%, the potential for achieving much more with much less effort is, well, it sounds truly massive.
It really is. And this isn't just about personal effectiveness, though that's a huge part of it, obviously. Grasping this imbalance, it can multiply corporate profitability. It can even improve public services while cutting costs. It's a fundamental shift in how we view productivity, really, across the board.
That's a powerful framework.
Yeah.
But where did this seemingly simple yet, profound idea even come from? Can you take us back to its origins?
Yeah, absolutely. So this powerful concept actually started way back in 1897 with an Italian economist, Vilfredo Pareto. He made this, groundbreaking discovery about the predictable, unequal distribution of wealth. He observed that, quite consistently, roughly 20% of the population was holding 80% of the wealth.
Wow. So that ratio is right there from the start.
Pretty much. And Pareto was an innovator because before him, nobody had really looked at two related data sets, like, say, wealth distribution compared to the number of wealth owners, and actually compared the percentages between them. But it's fascinating because Pareto himself, he didn't actually use the specific term 80-20. That simplification came much later, and apparently he was very bad at explaining it, which meant his groundbreaking work just sort of lay dormant for a generation.
So brilliant insights, but they needed a champion, someone to kind of bring them to light.
Exactly. How did the principle finally gain traction and become the powerful tool it is today?
Yeah.
That's where Joseph Moses Juran comes in. He was a quality guru. In 1951, he published his Quality Control Handbook, and he promoted Pareto's findings, calling it the rule of the vital few.
The vital few. Like that.
Yeah. And there's a fascinating anecdote here. Juran's theories were initially kind of ignored by U.S. industrialists. They weren't interested. But then in 1953, he was embraced in Japan, and his work there directly transformed their economy from one known for, frankly, shoddy imitations into this absolute powerhouse of high quality.
That's incredible. The impact was that profound.
Oh, absolutely. And it didn't stop there, did it? This principle then found its way into the tech world.
Right. How did that happen?
Well, IBM, back in the 1960s, made a critical observation. They realized that 80% of a computer's time is spent executing about 20% of the operating code.
Just 20% of the code doing 80% of the work.
Yeah, exactly. So this led them to rewrite their software, making that crucial 20% highly accessible and efficient. And that vastly improved machine performance. Later on, companies like Apple, Lotus, Microsoft, they all applied the same principle to make their software cheaper and easier to use for, a broader audience. The insight was that by optimizing for the few most used functions, they could deliver massive value without getting bogged down in features hardly anyone used.
And if we bring it right up to the modern day, You can see this kind of winner-take-all phenomenon playing out everywhere, can't you?
Yeah.
It seems driven by this 80-20 imbalance. I mean, think about it. Steven Spielberg earning $165 million, or that trial lawyer, Joseph Jamiel, earning $90 million, while merely competent professionals in the same fields earn just a tiny fraction of that. The gap is
It
enormous.
really is.
And the principle also highlights this broader societal inequality. Like during the 1980s, for example, the book says, a shocking, all the gains went to the top 20% of earners. And mind-boggling, 64% of the total increase went to the top 1%. Yeah.
64% to the top 1%. Yeah.
It's just staggering. And this imbalance isn't just in income, right? It's reflected in share ownership, too, with a small percentage of households holding a disproportionate amount of equity.
Yeah.
It really seems like this imbalance is just a natural tendency, almost like gravity.
It is, and that's a crucial point Koch makes. This imbalance will always reassert itself unless conscious, consistent, and massive efforts are made and sustained to overcome it. It's not some kind of anomaly, it's more like a default state, and understanding that is key, both to addressing its implications, the downsides, but also to leveraging its power.
So this really challenges our fundamental understanding of how the world actually works, doesn't it? It pushes back hard against what we often call linear thinking, that simple cause and effect worldview where, A causes B and everything's nice and predictable. The book argues the world is much more like an evolving organism. Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah, it's a really critical shift in perspective. We tend to think in these straight lines, right? Input equals output, effort equals reward. But the book argues that actually the whole system is more than the sum of its parts, and that causes are difficult to pin down. It emphasizes that equilibrium is illusory or fleeting. The universe, as Koch puts it, is wonky.
Wonky, I love that.
Yeah. Things aren't always neat and balanced. Instead, they're often self-organizing, and the results are frequently disproportionate.
That's fascinating. This idea of a wonky universe where balance is temporary, it really resonates. Are there other big ideas that help us understand why the 80-20 principle keeps showing up?
Absolutely. This is where we can draw a really powerful parallel with chaos theory. Now, despite its name, chaos theory doesn't actually mean, a hopeless and incomprehensible mess.
Right, it's not just random disorder.
No, exactly. Instead, it points to a kind of self-organizing logic lurking behind the disorder, a sort of predictable non-linearity. The economist Paul Krugman, for instance, described this aspect of economics as spooky, eerie, and terrifyingly exact. You see this logic clearly in things like positive feedback loops. These help explain how small advantages can amplify massively over time.
Okay, can you give us an example of those feedback loops, something concrete?
Sure. Think about the rich getting richer. It's often not just due to, say, superior ability or effort. It's also because richies themselves tend to get more riches through investment opportunities, connections, that kind of thing. It creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Or, a simpler example from the book, goldfish in a pond. Even if they start out roughly the same size, the ones that are just slightly bigger will grow very much bigger over time because their minor initial advantages allow them to capture disproportionately more food. It's a subtle initial difference leading to massive divergence.
And this ties directly into the concept of a tipping point, doesn't it? That moment where a small amount of effort can suddenly trigger huge returns.
Exactly. It's that critical threshold. Think about a new force. Maybe it's a product, maybe a disease, maybe a social trend. Initially, it struggles to gain traction. A great deal of effort might yield very little result. And sadly, many pioneers give up right before this point. But if that force persists and crosses a certain invisible line, that tipping point, then suddenly a small amount of additional effort can reap enormous returns. Things just take off.
So like a flu outbreak, right? Where a small change in infection rates, once it hits a certain point, can lead to a full-blown epidemic. Or like in movies, where word of mouth suddenly creates a tipping point that explains why something like Independence Day plays to packed houses for weeks, while another big-budget film like Waterworld quickly plays to almost none. It's that moment things go viral, almost exponentially.
Precisely. It just highlights how much of what we experience isn't linear at all, but follows these nonlinear, often amplifying patterns.
Okay, so having explored the underlying, wonky logic of the universe, the real magic, I think, for most of us, comes in how we can actually use this principle. Let's explore how to apply the 80-20 principle in the real world. Now, the book distinguishes between two main ways to approach this, 80-20 analysis and 80-20 thinking. Can you break down the difference for us?
Certainly. So 80/20 analysis is the empirical quantitative approach. It involves actually collecting data to reveal the true relationship between the inputs and the outputs. And importantly, this relationship might not be precisely 80/20. It could turn out to be, say, 65/35, or even something more extreme like 990.1.
Right. So, like the example used, if you analyzed 100 beer-drinking friends, you might find that, I don't know, 80% of the total beer drunk was consumed by only 28% of those friends. So that's an 80/28 relationship. What's the practical application of knowing such a specific ratio then?
Well, the key use here is to then concentrate on the key causes. In your example, the 28% of friends who drink the most beer. And, just as importantly, to ignore the 80% of beer drinkers who only consume 30% of the beer. In this hypothetical 8 or 28 case, it would be the other 72% of friends consuming 20% of the beer. This dramatically simplifies whatever task you're undertaking, marketing, resource allocation, whatever, by allowing you to focus your efforts where they'll have the biggest impact.
Okay, that makes sense. That's 80/20 analysis data-driven. What about 80/20 thinking?
Right, so 80/20 thinking is faster and often more accessible day to day. It involves really thinking deeply about an issue and making a judgment, an educated guess, really, about where the principle likely applies, often without needing to collect extensive data. Now, the book warns that it may on occasion mislead you because you are making an assumption about where that vital 20% lies. But crucially, Koch argues it's much less likely to mislead you than is conventional thinking, which often assumes a 50-50 balance that just isn't there. It's about developing an intuition, a kind of mental model for spotting imbalance, even without all the hard numbers.
Got it. So it's like having a heuristic, a useful rule of thumb to approach problems and decisions. Fascinating. Let's look at how businesses have profoundly used this principle. What were some of the major shifts we saw thanks to 80/20 thinking?
Yeah, we can see two major waves, really. The first one was the quality revolution, which happened roughly from, say, 1950 to 1990. Joseph Juran, who we mentioned earlier, was key here. He applied the 80/20 principle to statistical quality control. The core insight was revolutionary at the time. Identify and tackle the 20% of defects causing 80% of quality problems rather than trying to fix every little thing at once. It allowed companies to target their efforts for maximum impact on quality.
And were there specific examples of that in action, companies that really ran with this?
Oh, yeah. Companies like Ford Electronics Manufacturing Corporation used this in their Shingo prize-winning program. They achieved incredible quality improvements by focusing their efforts this way. Even the Pentagon applied it to product design. They realized that 80% of the lifecycle costs are usually locked in after only 20% of the development time.
Wow, so early decisions have a massive downstream impact.
Exactly. That insight completely changed their approach to design and procurement. Focus on getting the early stuff right.
Okay, so that was the quality revolution. Then came the information revolution from the 1960s onwards. How did 80/20 shape that?
Well, we touched on IBM optimizing its software, right? Focusing on that 20% of code used 80% of the time. Apple used a modified version for its Newton message pad. They found that apparently 0.01% of a person's vocabulary was sufficient to do 50% of the things you want to do with it.
0.01%. That's tiny.
Incredible, isn't it? This allowed them to make the device far more efficient by optimizing for just a tiny fraction of total possible inputs. And management thinkers like Peter Drucker also picked up on this. He highlighted the need for businesses to focus on external information, calling it information's ore, rather than getting lost in just internal data, because that crucial external 20% would likely yield 80% of the truly valuable strategic insights.
It's all about identifying where those leverage points are, isn't it? This leads us neatly to what the book calls the 80/20 theory of the firm. What does it actually mean for businesses and their profitability?
Right. It basically states that in any given market, a minority of suppliers will inevitably be far better at satisfying customer needs. And because they're better, they naturally accumulate market share and, crucially, profits. But the truly striking insight from Koch is this. 80% of surpluses or profits are generated by 20% of segments and by 20% of customers and by 20% of products.
So the imbalance applies across products, customers, and market segments.
Yes, and it even extends internally. Koch notes that 80% of the surplus is usually generated by 20% of employees. The imbalance is just startling. Think about this statistic. A product only has to be perceived as 10% better value than that of a competing product to generate a sales difference of 50% and a profit difference of 100%.
Just 10% better value leading to double the profit.
Exactly. It shows the power of perceived advantage in these nonlinear markets. So the action implication for businesses is pretty clear. Focus ruthlessly on those highest surplus segments, customers, products. Redeploy your best resources there and actively prune or manage the rest differently.
That sounds pretty ruthless, maybe, but the results can be remarkable, right? Can you give us a concrete example of a company really applying this level of analysis?
Yeah, the Electronic Instruments Inc. example from the book is a great illustration. Instead of just looking at overall profitability, they used what Keith calls an underview approach. This meant analyzing profitability not just by product line or customer type, but drilling down into specific competitive segments. These are parts of the business where they faced different competitors or different market dynamics.
Okay, so getting much more granular, and what did that kind of detailed analysis reveal?
Well, their product analysis showed that 67% of profits came from just 30% of product sales, specifically their top product groups, A, B, and C. This immediately suggested they should reallocate their sales effort. Why? Because even just a 20% increase in sales in these top groups could boost overall company profits by more than 50%. They could also consider cutting costs or maybe even exiting entirely from some of the less profitable product lines that were dragging down the average.
That's a very direct application. What about looking at their customer profitability? Did they find similar imbalances?
They did. They found various different imbalance rules applying, like a 5-9-15 rule in one area, meaning 15% of customers gave 59% of profits, and an 88-25 rule elsewhere. What these specific numbers tell us is that this dramatic imbalance isn't just a theory. It plays out with surprising consistency, but often different ratios across different aspects of a business. A small fraction of customers consistently drive the bulk of profits.
And what about those competitive segments you mentioned? That sounds like an even deeper level of analysis.
It was, and it was probably the most revealing. Their findings here were really striking. The top 6 segments, which represented only 26.3% of their total sales, generated a massive 82.9% of profits. So that's basically an 83-26 rule operating at the segment level.
83% of profit from just over a quarter of the sales volume.
Exactly. And knowing this allowed them to take really decisive action. They focused much more effort on the highly profitable A segments. For the B segments, which were profitable but less so, they decided to harvest them, essentially. Cut back effort, maybe raise prices slightly, and just milk them for remaining profits without further significant investment. The C segments, the least profitable, were de-emphasized, possibly phased out. And interestingly, they actually decided to invest more in one specific segment, segment 13, which was currently loss-making but looked attractive because it was a growing market where competitors are profitable. Their goal was to become a scale player there. The lesson is powerful. Apply the 80-20 principle to where you compete, not just what you sell or who you sell to.
This relentless focus on the vital few profitable segments, even to the point of cutting others, raises a pretty provocative question for businesses, doesn't it? As the book asks, why do you need people?
Indeed, it sounds harsh, but think about the supermarket analogy Koch uses. When supermarkets got customers to pick their own groceries, it was a massive shift. It essentially transferred labor costs to the consumer and transformed the industry's economics. We see this everywhere now. Self-service petrol stations, IKEA making you assemble your own furniture, fast food outlets where you fill your own drinks. It demonstrates how engaging the customer, or using technology, can significantly reduce the need for internal staff in certain areas.
And technology plays a huge role too, right? Like ATMs.
Absolutely. The principle suggests that machines may give 80% of the benefit at 20% of the cost. ATMs are a perfect example. They often provide a much better, faster 24/7 service for most routine transactions, and at a fraction of the cost of a traditional human teller. It's about leveraging technology to focus scarce human effort where it adds the most unique value.
I love the Interface Corporation of Georgia example too, the carpet company. Can you share that one?
Oh yeah, that's a brilliant one. They were a carpet supplier that shifted to a leasing model. But the genius part was, instead of replacing entire carpets when they got worn, they figured out that typically only 20% of any carpet receives 80% of the main walkways. So they started a service where they only replaced those worn sections.
That's clever, focusing on the impact.
Exactly. By identifying the critical 20% of wear and tear, they transformed a product, carpet, into a service, keeping your floor looking good, saved enormous amounts of resources, reduced waste, and presumably delighted their customers. It's about focusing on the result the customer wants, not just the whole physical product.
And a major reason businesses become inefficient and bloated is what the book calls the costs of complexity. Organizations tend to become overcomplex over time, which makes them inherently inefficient and wasteful. Complexity slows systems down, it creates friction, and it adds these insidious costs that are often hidden, hard to track.
Yeah.
What's the 80/20 solution to that creeping complexity?
Well, the counterintuitive but powerful idea Koch champions is that simple is beautiful. He cites a study of German companies which found that simplicity was the key differentiator for the winners. These successful companies typically had a narrower product range, fewer customers, and fewer suppliers than their less successful competitors. The profound insight here is that actively cutting the number of products, customers, and suppliers usually leads to higher profits, partly because it slashes those hidden complexity costs. Less to manage, less to go wrong.
And outsourcing ties into that simplification strategy, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. Outsourcing can be a really powerful way to cut complexity and costs by allowing a company to focus only on its core competencies, its comparative advantage, that vital 20% of activities it does best, and letting specialists handle the rest. And crucially, Koch warns businesses not to fall for the old contribution to overhead excuse for keeping unprofitable lines or customers. His argument is that those unprofitable segments require overheads too. They don't just contribute to them. And if you free up resources by cutting them, you can often grow the profitable segments surprisingly fast because all your energy is focused there.
Makes sense. Now, shifting gears slightly, when it comes to hooking the right customers and focusing sales and marketing efforts, what are the golden rules for applying the 80/20 principle effectively?
The book lays out 3 core rules here. First, marketing should focus intensely on providing a truly stunning product and service, but specifically within that 20% of the existing product line that generates the bulk of the profits. Don't spread the excellence too thin. Second, the entire firm, not just marketing, should devote extraordinary endeavor towards delighting the 20% of customers who provide 80% of the firm's sales and/or profits. Treat your best customers like gold. And third, remember that successful marketing almost always requires a product or service that is genuinely different and better value in the eyes of those core customers. You can't just market mediocrity effectively long term.
We see examples of this intense customer focus in various industries, right? Telecoms focusing on high-value users, Amex with its premium cardholders.
Exactly. MS Broadcasting is another example Cope gives, successfully increasing listener hours by focusing intensely on its core demographic audiences. It's not about pleasing everyone.
So it's really not about casting the widest possible net, but about deeply understanding and satisfying that vital few customer base. And for the sales teams on the ground, how does this translate into day-to-day action?
Well, for sales forces, it means consciously directing their efforts. Focus onto the 20% of products that generate 80% of sales. And perhaps even more importantly, salespeople should aim to spend 80% of their time on the best 20% of customers, the ones who generate the most value or have the potential to. The book gives these great anecdotes like Bill Bain, the founder of Bain & Company, who apparently, when running low on new sales prospects early on, just went back and sold more Bibles to his existing satisfied customers. Or the real estate broker Nicholas Barson, who gets over a third of his huge commissions just from repeat clients by literally knocking on their doors again later.
So the lesson is clear. Your existing high-value customers are often your most valuable and most overlooked asset.
Absolutely. Don't neglect them chasing novelty.
Okay, beyond the big strategic stuff in sales, the 80/20 principle also applies to things like 80/20 decision-making. What's the core advice there? It sounds intriguing.
Yeah, the advice here is incredibly practical and, frankly, a relief for anyone prone to analysis paralysis. It's essentially gather 80% of the data and perform 80% of the relevant analyses in the first 20% of the time available. Then make a decision 100% of the time and act decisively. Don't aim for perfect information. Aim for good enough information acted upon quickly.
80% of the info in 20% of the time, then act.
I like that.
And what about inventory management? That's another area where businesses often tie up huge amounts of capital inefficiently.
Oh, definitely. Most businesses, Koch argues, have far too much stock sitting around. Typically, 80% of stock only accounts for 20% of volume or revenues. You have warehouses full of slow-moving items. The Filofax example from the book illustrates this perfectly. They had way too many variants, different inserts and page types, and ended up with a huge overhang of worthless stock that nobody wanted. The advice is pretty direct. Ruthlessly cut unprofitable products and variants, and where possible, try to export inventory costs push them back onto suppliers or forward onto customers, or you can structure deals that way. Again, the core insight is that simplicity reduces waste and frees up capital.
Okay, this has been fascinating for the business world, but now let's pivot to something even more personal for you, our listener. Let's focus on how this principle can potentially lead to more freedom, more earnings, more enjoyment in your own life. This seems to be where 80/20 thinking, that more intuitive approach, really comes into its own as something, quote, pragmatic and internally generated, centered around the individual.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for our personal aspirations, our happiness?
Well, this personal application of 80/20 thinking actively seeks pleasure and operates on the belief that most achievement is actually a byproduct of interest, joy, and the desire for future happiness. It's not about grim determination. It really challenges you, the listener, to genuinely consider, are you spending significant time with people you don't much like? Are you doing jobs or parts of jobs that you're not enthusiastic about? Are you using your precious free time on activities you don't actually enjoy? Because if you are, the argument goes, you're likely violating the 80/20 principle in your own life, wasting energy on low-yield activities.
And this way of thinking directly challenges that common perception that we're always short on time, always rushing. Instead, the book argues for an abundance of time. That sounds optimistic. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it does sound optimistic, but the logic is based on observation. Koch argues that most of what any of us achieve in life occurs in a very small proportion of our working lives, those breakthrough moments, those key projects. Therefore, achievement is driven by insight and selective action, not by just being constantly busy, filling every minute. The core insight for personal life is that 80% of achievement and happiness takes place in 20% of our time, and, crucially, these peaks can be expanded greatly. So this calls for what Koch terms a time revolution, not just better time management. Simply speeding up or being more efficient with our use of time will not help us. Indeed, such ways of thinking are more the problem than the solution. It's about doing less, but doing the right things.
Doing less of the low-value stuff to make room for more of the high-value stuff. Okay, so how do you actually kickstart this time revolution in your own life? The book offers 7 powerful steps, and they all seem to build on this core idea of kind of separating effort from reward. What's
Yeah,
the
okay.
first step?
Right. The very first step is foundational. Dissociate effort and reward. This directly challenges the deeply ingrained belief, the work ethic maybe, that hard work always leads to high returns. Instead, 80/20 thinking suggests hard work often leads to low returns, while insight, leverage, and focusing on the right things lead to high returns. Koch gives examples like Ronald Reagan's apparently effortless progression to president, suggesting he focused on key moments and messages, not constant toil. Or think of Warren Buffett, whose investment philosophy borders on lethargy, selecting very few stocks and holding them for the long term, yet it made him one of the richest people on earth. It wasn't about frantic activity.
So it's really about smart effort, focused effort, not just maximum effort. What are the other steps in this time revolution?
Okay, second, and this is huge. Love what you do, or at least find aspects you can love. Use Michelangelo as an example. His incredible output wasn't driven by obligation, but by his profound, almost obsessive love for creation. Passion fuels high-value output. Third, control your time. This is critical. The book states that the 20% who achieve the most either work for themselves or behave as if they do. They rigorously choose their commitments, partners, and how they spend their time. Fourth, be unconventional and maybe even a bit eccentric in your use of time. Don't just follow the herd. Koch cites the example of the 19th century British Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone. Despite huge responsibilities, he spent his time as he pleased, reading avidly, going to the theater, traveling, even taking specific rest days. This unconventional approach arguably fueled his enormous political effectiveness over decades.
That's a great example of prioritizing personal energy to fuel professional output. Okay, what are the last 3 steps?
Fifth, you need to actively identify your happiness islands and achievement islands. These are those specific, maybe small amounts of time, or perhaps certain periods or years in your life that yield a disproportionate amount of your happiness or your success. Pinpoint what they are and why. And conversely, identify your unhappiness islands and achievement desert islands, the times and activities that drain you or yield nothing. Sixth, once you've identified the good stuff, multiply the 20%. Actively, consciously increase the time you spend on these high-value activities. This might even require significant career or lifestyle changes, but the payoff should be disproportionate. And seventh, perhaps the hardest part, eliminate or reduce the 80% low-value activities. The advice here is stark. Be ruthless. Don't do things just because people ask you to or out of vague obligation. Learn to just say no, or sometimes, as Koch puts it, treat the matter with a complete ignore. This explicitly includes things other people want you to do that don't align with your goals, or simply things you don't enjoy doing that produce little value.
Wow. That last one sounds especially challenging for a lot of people, myself included. Saying no, ignoring things, it goes against a lot of social conditioning. But it's about being incredibly selective with your finite time and energy, isn't it?
It is, but the book argues it's crucial for maximizing both achievement and happiness. And a critical aspect of this personal transformation, closely related to time, is understanding the role of allies and relationships. The 80-20 principle puts forth a key hypothesis here. 80% of the value of our relationships comes from 20% of the relationships.
80% of the value from just 20% of the people we know.
Exactly. And often, the book suggests these are the close dupe relationships, maybe formed earlier in life, family, close friends.
So the book suggests an exercise, right? If I were to actually list my, say, top 20 friends and loved ones, and then honestly note the time I spend with them versus everyone else, what would I likely find?
Well, Koch predicts that you will find that you spend much less than 80% of the time with the few people who comprise 80% of relationship value to you. We tend to spread ourselves too thin. So the clear action implication is go for quality rather than quantity. Invest more time and energy in those truly vital relationships. And this focus also extends to professional relationships and alliances because, as the book states, exceptional individual performance requires allies. You rarely achieve great things completely alone.
Okay, so what are the key ingredients for those powerful, effective alliances?
The book lists 5 key ingredients: mutual enjoyment, you actually have to like working together, mutual respect, shared experience, building history together, reciprocity, it has to be give and take, and fundamentally, trust. For people early in their careers, the advice is particularly pointed. Fill your ally slots carefully. Don't just network randomly. Aim consciously for maybe 1 to 2 mentors, 2 to 3 supportive peers, and maybe 1 to 2 mentees you can help develop. It's about building a focused, high-quality, supportive network.
Thinking about careers, specifically through an 80-20 lens, is equally insightful, isn't it? The book notes that in many professions now, the winners take all. That has pretty significant implications for someone trying to advance their career, right?
Huge implications. It implies that just being good might not be good enough anymore in many fields. You must aim for the top in their field to reap disproportionate rewards. This strongly suggests you should specialize in a very small niche, something that you genuinely enjoy, that passion point again, and that you have the potential to truly excel in, to become one of the best. The goal is to know a few things well, one thing exceptionally well. The book also notes that, informationally, 80% of information is the property of 20% of people, highlighting the rise of the fortunate fifth of what are called symbolic analysts.
Symbolic analysts, what are they?
These are essentially knowledge workers, people who primarily deal in ideas, information, problem solving, strategy, rather than routine manual or clerical labor. Their specialized knowledge is highly valuable in an information economy.
So the advice is find your niche expertise, become exceptional at it, and then figure out who needs that expertise.
Exactly. Identify your market and your core customers, the people or organizations who will pay a premium for your specialized knowledge, and constant look for where 20% of effort gives 80% of returns within your chosen profession. What are the highest leverage activities? It's also vital, the book suggests, to learn from the best. Try to work for top firms and individuals. Observe their 20/80 practices. How do they focus their efforts?
And finally, there's this interesting concept of labor leverage applied to careers. How does that work? What are the stages?
Right. This is about progressively increasing your impact beyond just your own hours. Koch outlines 4 stages. First, simply leveraging your own time more effectively using 80-20 principles. Second, potentially becoming self-employed or starting your own business to capture 100% of the value you create, rather than just a salary. Third, employing other people, but specifically employing net value creators, people who add a great deal more value than they cost, not just hiring bodies, but hiring leverage. And fourth, the ultimate stage perhaps, contracting out everything that you or your core team are not several times better at doing than anyone else. Focus only on your absolute highest value contribution.
It's a clear progression towards maximizing impact. And of course, we can't talk about achieving more without touching on money, money, money. That also obeys the 80-20 principle, right? I mean, Pareto's original discovery was, after all, about wealth distribution. What's the key 80-20 insight about building wealth?
Yeah, the profound, maybe sobering truth about wealth accumulation, according to Koch, is that 80% of wealth is created from investment rather than from income. Your biggest long-term gains likely won't come from just earning a higher salary, although that helps. They'll come from strategically investing a portion of your income, even if it's small initially, and leveraging the incredible power of compounding over time. Small differences in annual returns, say earning 5% versus hypothetically 40% on a focused investment, lead to dramatically, wildly skewed results over decades.
So what's the critical lesson for investors then from an 80-20 perspective? How should you approach it?
Well, Koch offers 10 commandments of investment, but a core 80-20 theme runs through them. It involves being proactive, unbalanced, making only a few carefully chosen investments, and investing mainly in the stock market for the long term. He cites Ann Scheiber turning $5 cares into 22 meters over 50 years. Crucially, it advises investing most when the market is low, using indicators like the price-earnings ratio. Under 12 is a potential buy, over 17 a danger sign. And perhaps the most classic 80-20 advice: cull your loss makers ruthlessly. Sell if a share falls, say, 15% from your purchase price. But even more importantly, run your gains. Do not cut your gains too early. Superstar shares give phenomenal returns. That's where the 80% of gains will come from the 20% of winners. Don't sell them just because they've gone up a bit, unless maybe the price falls 15% from its recent high, signaling a potential trend change. It's about letting your winners run.
Cut the losers, ride the winners. Sounds simple, but hard to do emotionally. And ultimately, while money can certainly help achieve the lifestyle you want, does the book offer a sort of cautionary note about chasing money itself?
It does. Koch is clear that while money is useful, money can bite back. It has diminishing utility. Each extra dollar brings less happiness. It brings maintenance costs. Managing wealth takes time and energy. And it can be tax inefficient. The core message seems to be that focusing directly on happiness, perhaps through a simpler and cheaper lifestyle, can often yield better results than just chasing maximum wealth. Money is a tool, not the ultimate end goal.
And that brings us perfectly to what might be the ultimate goal of applying all this: happiness. How can the 80-20 principle specifically help you be happier?
Well, it applies the same logic. It focuses on two key leverage points. First, consciously expand the times when you are happiest. Identify those happiness islands and do more of what causes them. And second, actively reduce the times when you are least happy. Identify those unhappiness islands and ruthlessly eliminate or minimize them. It also strongly challenges the idea that our level of happiness is somehow predestined or fixed. Koch gives examples of individuals who materially changed their happiness baseline through conscious actions, finding a new partner, changing careers, moving location, etc.
So we're not just stuck with our temperament, we have agency over our happiness.
Exactly. The book emphasizes that emotional intelligence, understanding and managing your own emotions and recognizing them in others is something that can be cultivated. He asserts that temperament is not destiny. And related to the earlier point about relationships, the book highlights the profound impact that the people you see day in and day out have on your happiness and even your physical health. So selecting your close circle, your environment carefully is vital for well-being.
So what are some practical applications? Daily habits for happiness based on 80-20.
Koch suggests identifying your personal high-yield happiness habits. He lists 7 daily happiness habits as common examples, but the key is finding your vital few. These might include things like exercise, mental stimulation, learning, reading, spiritual or artistic stimulation or meditation, doing a good turn for someone else, taking a specific pleasure break with a friend, deliberately giving yourself a small treat, and consciously congratulating yourself on achievements. The point isn't to do all 7 every day, but to identify the 1 or 2 that give you the most happiness, bang for your buck, and make sure you do those. Similarly, he lists 7 shortcuts to a happy life. Broader principles like maximizing your sense of control, setting attainable goals, being flexible, nurturing a close relationship with your partner, having a few genuinely happy friends, maintaining those few close professional alliances we talked about, and consciously evolving towards your ideal lifestyle. Again, it's about focusing effort on the few things that matter most for your happiness.
It really comes back to that selective focus again and again. Now, let's broaden the discussion one last time, looking at society as a whole. The book argues the 80-20 principle isn't just descriptive of how things are, it's prescriptive. What does it prescribe for society? How can it point the way forward?
Right. By highlighting the massive gap between inputs and outputs in almost every area, the principle inherently reveals a failure to reach anything like an optimal state of affairs. It doesn't just describe inefficiency, it implicitly points the way to great improvements by showing where effort is currently being wasted and where targeted effort could yield disproportionately large benefits for society.
This becomes particularly relevant when we look at some big societal challenges like the idea of a 20.8 society, where maybe only 20% of the workforce is needed for traditional jobs, and those winner-take-all concerns about mass unemployment and rising inequality. Some might paint a pretty doom and gloom picture here based on these trends. What does the book say to that pessimism?
Well, while acknowledging those concerns are real and the trends exist, the book asserts that both pessimists and revolutionaries are wrong in their conclusions. It points to historical evidence arguing that prosperity is not a problem in itself. New technology, historically, has always ultimately led to higher overall living standards and more employment, not less, even if the types of jobs change dramatically. The adjustment, Koch suggests, can happen through growth in new types of jobs, often in smaller, more specialized companies, a rise in personal businesses and self-employment, and potentially significant growth in the voluntary or social sector. It's about adapting to the changing landscape by focusing on new areas of value creation, not trying to artificially prop up the old 80% that's becoming less relevant.
Education is presented as a prime area where an 80/20 application could yield massive benefits. What are the key insights there? What really matters in schools?
Yeah, this is fascinating. Koch cites a Brookings Institute study of 500 U.S. high schools. It found that many of the things we usually focus on, like overall money spent per student, teacher salaries, even class size within reasonable limits, didn't correlate strongly with school success. What did matter? Things like the degree of parental control and involvement, the clarity of the school's mission, strong leadership, the school's autonomy from bureaucracy, and crucially, the freedom and respect enjoyed by the teachers. This strongly suggests that a few key levers, mostly related to focus, autonomy, and culture, drive the majority of educational success, rather than just broad financial inputs.
That's truly eye-opening. Focus on the vital few factors, not just pouring money in. Are there practical examples of applying different, potentially more effective methods?
Yes. The book highlights insights from The Learning Revolution by Dryden and Voss, which showcased methods achieving astonishingly beneficial results. Examples included things like specialized programs in New Zealand helping students catch up years of reading age in just weeks, or U.S. Army language students achieving reportedly 661% better German results using specific intensive methods, or UK high schools getting dramatically better foreign language scores. The conclusion drawn is clear. We must identify and adopt what works best through proven, often unconventional methods, empower parents and teachers, and perhaps encourage more competition and choice in schools, rather than just tinkering with the existing system that seems stuck in low-yield activities.
We also see the principle potentially at work in social policy, like in crime reduction. The example of New York City's dramatic reduction in crime starting in the mid-90s under Commissioner William Bratton is often cited. What was his reported 80/20 approach?
Right. Bratton famously applied zero tolerance for minor offenses, but strategically, he also focused police resources specifically on targeting the 20% of offenders who cause 80% of the crime. The idea was to reach a tipping point where disrupting the activity of the most prolific criminals had a disproportionately large impact on overall crime rates, which seemed to work dramatically in NYC at the time.
And in healthcare, another huge area of societal spending, the 80/20 principle also offers some pretty unconventional solutions, doesn't it? What's the core insight there?
Yeah, the core insight, drawing on findings like those from a U.S. Surgeon General report, is that only a surprisingly small percentage, maybe 10% of illness, was attributable to medical care or its absence, whereas a huge chunk, maybe fully 50%, was related to personal behavior, diet, exercise, smoking, etc. So an 80/20 approach would suggest shifting resources dramatically, perhaps massive energies to health education in schools, maybe fewer hospitals, more nutritionists, more gyms, more parks, more cycle lanes, and high taxes on unhealthy food. Basically focusing much more on preventing the 20% of behaviors that cause 80% of the health problems, rather than mainly focusing on treating the consequences after the fact.
It's worth noting, too, as the book does, that state-provided services, perhaps due to lack of competition or complex bureaucracy, are often identified as being in the 80% of activity delivering 20% of the value, compared to the efficiency often forced upon private businesses by market pressures.
Yes, that's a recurring theme. The principle really highlights the huge gaps in performance inherent in all aspects of life, whether personal, corporate, or governmental. But the positive spin on that is the assertion of the immense potential for terrific progress across all these areas. If we can just identify and focus on the vital few inputs, the potential for improvement is enormous. It's a powerful lens for identifying where real improvement is not just possible, but often maybe staring us in the face if we look differently.
So, as we bring this deep dive to a close, It feels clear that really understanding and internalizing the 80-20 principle means tempering any fears you might have about complexity or overload with, actually, a massive dose of optimism. The book really reassures us that an awesome amount of improvement is possible in industry and society, and maybe most importantly in our own lives. It really feels like a call to action, doesn't it? To consciously identify and then amplify those crucial few inputs that truly drive the results we want.
Absolutely. The 80-20 principle really asserts that we could make huge improvements to the wealth, to the happiness of every individual, and ultimately to the quality of society as a whole if we just applied this thinking more consistently. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? But it really does make you fundamentally rethink how you're spending your precious time and energy. So maybe as you reflect on everything we've discussed today, here's a final question for you to consider. What 20% in your own life, if you could identify it and really amplify it, could potentially generate 80% of the progress you seek, not just for yourself, but maybe also for those around you?